News, politics, and special guests with a Texas twist. That's the goal of the Luke Macias Show. Our nation and state are at a crossroads, and if you're not informed, you're not equipped to make the change that our community needs. Join the conversation and join the cause for liberty today. Welcome to episode 20 of the Luke Macias Show. Welcome back, guys. For those of you who missed last week's episode, it was a conversation between Thomas Umstead and Brad Pierce regarding a discussion that's happening amongst fellow pro-life Texans on the approach of gradualism versus the approach of abolition when it comes to how to address the pro-life issue. I received a ton of very positive feedback from that conversation, had lawmakers and activists and all sorts of people on both sides of that discussion reach out and thank me for just putting on the discussion. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, please do take just a little bit of time. It's an hour and a half long, so it's definitely not one you can necessarily get through in one sitting unless you just really love listening to discussions that much. But getting right onto this week's, and again, we just to remind everybody, we kind of have a format here where every other week, we just do a very quick update on news, politics, events, and then every other week, we try to have a sit-down discussion with someone who's in some way involved in conservative policy, conservative politics, or things like this, where we have a policy discussion on the issues of abortion, guns, things like that. So that being said, let's get right into an update on what's going on in news, politics, and special things going on in Texas. So Rice University released their rankings. Mark Jones, more specifically, the political science professor at Rice University, one of probably the most respected political science professor in the state of Texas. And Mark and I have had a conversation. He's going to be coming on the podcast here shortly, which we are excited about. But he released his rankings. And if you want to go read his commentary on it, you can go to tribtalk.org. These are rankings that I enjoy looking at. Now, I want to explain to our listeners what these are. And at the end of the day, Mark takes basically every single vote, and he explains it a little further in his piece, but in a sense, these are contested votes, and he takes those votes and puts them into an algorithm that basically determines how often you are or are not working with the other side of the aisle. And essentially, if you are voting with the Democrat caucus more than all of your Republican colleagues, which would be representative of Sarah Davis from the Houston area, then you are ranked as the most liberal Republican. And if you are voting with Democrats less than anybody else, you're considered the most conservative Republican, which is Representative Briscoe Cain from Baytown. And then if you're on the Democrat side, again, if you are Democrats that are constantly voting with the majority of Republicans, even against the majority of Democrats, then you're considered amongst the most conservative Democrats. And then if you are never voting with Republicans and Democrats, you're always voting, against the Republican majority, even if, let's say 30, 40 Democrats are siding with them, then you're considered among the most liberal Democrats. So that is an understanding. There are two great write-ups that y'all can look at, tribtalk.org, also the Texan.news. Mackenzie Taylor did a great job overviewing the study. And what she did, which I found really fascinating, was that she looked at just how much current lawmakers or returning lawmakers had changed from their rankings last session. So, for example, I gave Representative Justin Holland and Tom Oliverson shout outs. Jay Dean doesn't have a Twitter account, but if he did, I would, because those three lawmakers were among some of the Republicans that jumped most significantly, meaning that 2 years ago, they were voting with the Democrat caucus significantly more than they voted with the Democrat caucus this time around. And then also you had just some noticeable declines. A lot of people have talked about these different individuals, but Representatives Leach, Click, Sanford, and Burrows fell significantly just when it comes to their rankings in comparison to sessions before. Again, the Texan.news has just a great write-up that looks at all the lawmakers and shows you who's going up and down. But the last big observation from it is this. Mark Jones noted that the 12 Democrats that are representing seats that were taken in the 2018 election. So these are historically Republican districts that are now being represented by Democrats. Those 12 Democrats are all ranked in the liberal wing of the Democrat caucus. And what does that mean? Well, surprise, surprise, Democrats actually believe what they run on. These Democrat lawmakers ran on being progressive leftists who had an agenda and wanted to vote according to that agenda. And they got to Austin and they didn't say, well, in order to keep this seat, I'm going to vote with Republicans as much as possible. This is the type of attitude that most conservatives are frustrated that they did not see out of their own Republican lawmakers this last session. If you look at Republicans, many of whom, dropped significantly. Morgan Meyer, Jeff Leach, many of them were in districts that Beto O'Rourke won this last election cycle. And so many times lawmakers were, saying that they should moderate, that they should stop voting according to the principles that they have previously held due to, the fact that their district is significantly moving in a more left direction. And so the question is, which of those perspectives is more beneficial from an advancement of conservative policy and from maintaining your control in the legislature? And that's yet to be determined. We have yet to see whether or not Democrats who voted far left will be punished. But our hope is that individual constituents within their districts will, and we've yet to see whether lawmakers who started to go to the middle a little bit will be rewarded. But the reality is that it wasn't helpful to not have so many Republicans advancing strong conservative issues this last legislative session, and the results showed for themselves. Now, though, to their credit, Republicans did get Democrats on record on a handful of very controversial issues. They weren't the type of votes that actually advanced policy too much. Conservatives do like to see conservative policy actually advanced instead of more show votes at times, but there are a handful of issues that Democrats were gotten on the record on, and the question is whether these 12 freshman Democrats who all represent really middle of the line districts will be held accountable by their voters. But Jeff Leach was able to pass a constitutional amendment that will now get voted on this November, which will ban a statewide income tax. And then also Representative Leach was able to pass the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which did not further protect children from infanticide. And this is just my opinion. Other people could have their opinions, but I don't think that anybody who was going to commit infanticide will not as a result of Jeff Leach's bill. What does that mean? It means that infanticide was already illegal in Texas. So if you were going to kill a child after it was born, we were going to punish you significantly. Jeff Leach simply increased the level of punishment a little bit. I don't know that that will prevent anybody from doing so, but it was great to get so many Democrats on the record supporting essentially New York-style laws which say that infanticide can be legal. And these are the type of cultural battles that we are having today, and it's the type of cultural battles that Texans need to be ready to engage in moving into the future. So Rice University's rankings are out. You can look at where your lawmaker, how they went up or down. Again, Rice University doesn't rank whether or not we had a conservative session or not. Okay, it also just takes the votes that come. One of conservatives' big beefs with this session was that many conservative issues just never got to the floor. And so keep that in mind, too, when you look at Rice University's ranking. The Texas Fiscal Responsibility Index was also released by Empower Texans, and you can go to their website to see their rankings. And they have noted that there were significantly less taxpayer champions than they've had in sessions in the past. Go there, look at your lawmakers' rankings, and see where your state senator or state representative fall, and then look at the individual votes. You know, one of the things is you'll see a lot of different lawmakers that complain with every single one of these rankings or scorecards that come out. But what I encourage people to do is go to an individual's page. And by the way, there were, state senator Republicans who I respect, admire, have a relationship with who didn't do too well. And I had different individuals who said, I can't believe that guy scored so poorly, and almost mentioned it in light of being critical to Empower Texans for not ranking him better. But, one of the questions I asked was, have you gone to the ranking and looked at the votes he cast? And can you say which ones you think he should have been rated positively for? Can you say one of the votes that he took that you think actually put him on the side for taxpayers instead of against them in the votes that he's cast? And so anyways, go look at the Fiscal Responsibility Index and take a look at what that is. Also, we just had a local election runoffs, and there were a couple big elections that I want to talk to you about. Even though Texans are all across the state, there were two localities that I want to bring to your attention. One was a great win for taxpayers, and that was the city of Plano. Shelby Williams and Lily Bow were victorious in their runoff elections, and this puts a governing majority of conservatives on the Plano City Council. And one of the biggest victories, in my opinion, was Shelby Williams, who ran against a gentleman named Ron Kelly. Ron Kelly, for those of you in the DFW area, you might be familiar with him, but he is somebody who initially ran on a conservative, limited government, anti-taxes platform, and then he got to council and decided to become a deal maker, and it significantly affected his voting record because he started voting against taxpayers. And so not only did Lily Bow win the open seat, but Shelby Williams defeated Ron Kelly, sending a message to hopefully local officials across the state that if you run with the support of conservatives on one conservative platform and then you betray them and start voting against their interest, then there will be consequences to your actions. And so if you're in the Plano area, if you are one of the conservative activists across the state that was working in that district, congratulations, well fought. We're really rejoicing with you even down here in the San Antonio area for your victories there. And speaking of San Antonio had a huge runoff election, and I had a number of yard signs in rental homes that I have in San Antonio for Greg Brockhouse, who was running for mayor there. He was a clearly articulate right of center option for the citizens of San Antonio, and he came up short, receiving 49% of the vote against Ron Nuremberg, the sitting mayor, who I think came under fire most notably for his bigotry against Chick-fil-A for their Christian values and the worldviews that they hold. And so that was a defeat for conservatives, but it's something to still be somewhat encouraged about. I mean, for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in San Antonio, around San Antonio politics, you wouldn't know that 49% is tremendous when it comes to a clearly identified right of center candidate in the city. This is an urban center. This is a very left of center city when it comes to the general demographics of the city of San Antonio. And with Greg Brockhouse getting such a strong showing, it is real proof that even middle of the road urban centers are starting to become dissatisfied with leftists running their cities. And, we have an upcoming battle with the city of Houston. I would encourage conservatives to keep their eyes on that mayoral race as well, because you're about to have several individuals who are in the center and right of center run in the largest urban area in Texas. And seeing where that election goes will be definitely something to keep your eyes on. But when it comes to the city of San Antonio, it's an unfortunate loss for conservatives, but I would be encouraged that so many voters seem to be waking up to the fact that our cities should not be run by leftists. And last but not least, I just want to talk about the fact that something all of us know, but there is a growing gap, especially post-session, that's being recognized between elected officials and normal Republican voters. And some people say grassroots voters, some people could say Republican precinct chairman, activists, delegates, all of these individuals who are the lifeblood of a lot of the work that goes into conservative politics and conservative policies. But honestly, I think the gap is also between just normal voters, the guy who's a 3R Republican that you'd go knock on his door. And the reality is that they are not happy with the legislative session. And so Republicans are starting to go back home, and I'm already getting reports from different grassroots individuals who are calling me saying, I just left a town hall from my Republican state representative, and he just defended every single thing they'd ever done. And so I wanted to, speak to that in just a quick way. I wanted to, just give a point. I talked to another lawmaker, and this is a Republican, very conservative state representative who went and met with two large groups of conservative constituents within his district, and he didn't have the same blowback that other Republican lawmakers had. And that's because he didn't try to walk in and say this was the most conservative session ever, and we were rock stars and we did everything we wanted and we kept all our promises to you, and you should be really encouraged and vote for conservatives and Republicans in 2020. Instead, he went in and really sold accurately what people got, which is the fact that, yes, we got a handful of victories, and we can go through those lists of victories. There was a key victory for religious liberty led by Representative Matt Krause and Brian Hughes. There was a very small, tiny victory on the abortion issue when it comes to saying that future cities can't contract with abortion providers. And we had property tax caps on cities and counties starting in 2020, property tax caps on schools starting in 2021, and $5 billion of property tax relief, which is significantly more than the legislature originally wanted to give to Texans. They started out with a plan to give them $2.7 billion, and because of the pressure from the conservatives, they increased that number to $5 billion. And so there are a handful of victories that you can give to your constituents. But the reality is, if you walk into a room and try to convince these people that Republicans in Texas don't have an issue when it comes to the disconnect between our legislature and the normal voters, then it shouldn't be received well by your constituents. So one, don't try to defend the budget. If you are people going around the state of Texas, it's not helpful. The budget was significantly larger than it has been in quite some time. The last time it was even close to this big, it was a little bigger. The Wall Street Journal wrote an article saying Texas is going Sacramento. So the reality is, after that criticism and after a lot of conservatives came into the legislature, following that session, we had two back-to-back budgets that fit within the conservative budget ideology, which is population plus inflation, and this went significantly above that. And so acknowledge the fact that the budget spent more money than we should reasonably have spent. And not only that that was only based on assuming that the economy is going to do very well for the next 2 years. And if the economy doesn't, we are going to come back next session with a hole to fill. And we've already spent $6 billion from our savings account. And so we are not even putting ourselves in a position to weather a storm well when that storm inevitably comes. I think Republican lawmakers across the state need to be able to explain to grassroots individuals at Republican meetings all throughout the summer that the failures of Texas when it comes to our willingness to address the life issue, like all of our neighboring states, with heartbeat legislation, abolition legislation that makes much stronger stances, is a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. And just a willingness to say that we have Republicans within the party that just don't want to go there, that just don't want to pass that legislation. Some people would be the type to name names, some people wouldn't. But at the end of the day, if you can't just acknowledge the fact that it is a Republican issue, I think you're going to have more blowback from grassroots individuals. And then last, just oppose the Bonnen rule. And this is another thing. Speaker Bonnen has come out recently and basically said that any Republican lawmakers that try to elect Republicans in those 12 districts, so those 12 districts that Democrats took back, any Republican lawmakers who try to go elect Republicans to replace those seats will be punished by the speaker. And hopefully Speaker Bonnen could clarify those issues. Maybe he didn't quite mean what he said. And if he came out and clarified it, that'd be great, because then nobody would have to break the Bonnen rule or oppose the Bonnen rule. But the reality is, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about if Mitch McConnell said, hey, I'm going to punish Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, any of these, John Cornyn, if they go in two states that Democrats currently hold and try to elect Republican United States senators. That would be crazy. And when it comes to the fact that so many of us as conservatives are being told that the reason we couldn't pass more conservative legislation was because there weren't enough Republican votes. And now you have a Republican speaker who's seemingly telling Republican lawmakers, you can't go try to get more Republicans within these districts. This is an issue that I think will continue to be brought up over the next several months, and I think lawmakers would do best to make it clear to their constituents that I'm going to run hard for my own reelection, and if I'm in a strong Republican district, I'm going to be in other districts that we can pick up so that we have more Republican votes so that we can pass more of these conservative policies next session. But if you are a conservative activist, and I want you to listen to me, if you're a conservative activist who's frustrated by the session, you are amongst a lot of friends. Most conservatives, in fact, I would venture to say almost every single conservative in the state of Texas is very upset and disappointed by the legislative session. If you know your state representative, what I would encourage you to do is try to have a meeting with them and do your research, make a list of things that you're disappointed in, and sit down with them and ask them, can you explain to me why these things did not happen? Can you tell me if you were publicly in support of all of these policies that I cared about? Can you tell me who you think is to blame for the failures to pass these different policies? And you'll get different answers. Some of the blame is in the Senate. Some of the blame is in the House. Some of the blame is in the governor's mansion. Some of the blame is in the fact that there's literally not enough votes in some of these chambers to do a couple of the things. But go and meet with them. And I will tell you, you will have, of course, some of you are represented by very shrewd politicians who will dance around and fail to answer your questions directly. But I think many of you would be surprised that you might actually sit down with your state representative and for him to hear your true frustration and to give you a real honest answer. If you do receive a real honest answer, you should be grateful for the opportunity to be represented and to work alongside individuals who are willing to address these issues honestly. And if you have somebody who just tries to obfuscate and explain to you why you don't understand that what you got out of the session was phenomenal, then you can make a clear distinction when it comes to a public servant and a politician. But please do that. I see a lot of people on Facebook criticizing their legislators' score on the Texas scorecard or anything. Look, that's what public accountability is for. You should be saying, here is a clear scorecard. That is disappointing. And, I wish that my lawmaker was taking better votes. But I also want to encourage you to reach out to that lawmaker and sit down with them and say, hey, can you explain to me? Let's go through these votes. I have the votes printed out. Explain to me why you voted here, why you voted here, why you voted here. And some will be honest with you, and some will have the strangest excuses you've ever heard. But the reality is, if you don't go sit down and talk with them, then you won't ever give them a chance to make that explanation. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And with that, we are going to go to a quick word from our sponsor, and then you're going to get a very quick update from Raz Schaefer on the federal level. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a blessed day. Guys, our sponsor for today's show is Patriot Academy. PatriotAcademy.com. You have heard me talk about this organization, but this truly is, for many students, a life-altering event. I cannot tell you how many 16, 17, 18, 20, 25-year-olds that have gone to this leadership program and come out with an entirely new direction for their life. You can go to PatriotAcademy.com to find out where they do these events, but essentially they take these students and they go through a week of being a legislator. They actually debate in the Texas House of Representatives, in the Delaware House of Representatives, Idaho House of Representatives. It's an incredible experience. I have been involved with them. I believe in what they do. In fact, if you contact them and tell them that you heard about them through the Luke Macias show, I will contribute toward your fee of actually attending. If you know a student that needs to go, that needs direction for their life, they're going to have an opportunity to learn about worldview, about free market economics, about the values that hold society together, and they're going to have an opportunity to be equipped to be a part of making the change that our community, our state, our nation need. So PatriotAcademy.com, we're grateful for their willingness to sponsor this podcast, and we also want to encourage each and every one of you to check them out. Please do so today.
All right, guys, this week I just got one thing for you, and I want to give you a quick rundown on Rand Paul's penny plan that got shot down by the Senate this last week. So it was killed on a procedural vote. They was not able to invoke cloture. You had it was a 22-69 vote, so only 22 Republicans voted to move the bill forward. So you have to pass cloture in order to get to the floor to debate it and then pass or fail. In the Senate, you got to get that 60-vote threshold. So it fell well short of that by only having 22 folks vote for it, for moving forward. So the question is, why did so many Republicans who have a majority in the Senate, why did they not vote for this? And it's pretty frustrating that they didn't. It's basically a plan to, at its core, to cut 2% from the budget annually over the next several years. And so what this is going to do is basically cut $11 trillion from the budget over the decade. So as we're seeing our deficit balloon, our deficit so far this year is 58% above what it was last year. And Rand Paul and even a bunch of conservative senators, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, both voted to move it forward. They both voted with Rand Paul on this. But what they're saying is we have to introduce more fiscal sanity. Tax cuts are great, but we also have to do spending reform. And Rand Paul's proposal, it protected Social Security and helped make that more solvent. It was going to do some things like help expand health savings account and help put just even had a note in there basically saying that the United States will not be a socialist nation. So he's doing a number of very, very positive things. And we're pretty well flummoxed as far as why so many Republican senators would not stand up for that. And my hope is that those of you that live in other states other than Texas where your Republican senators do not support this bill, you'll call and ask them, because I don't think they have a very good answer. Now, there are a lot of good, quote unquote, good guys who regularly vote the right way that were not with us on this vote. And so it's very concerning. I think they need to stand up and be counted on this and give an answer to why. And hopefully they'll listen to their constituents and make a better call on this in the future. Right now, it's really easy to talk about the deficit and spending and how big a problem it is. But when they're faced with the opportunity to do something about that, they're not taking that step forward. Frankly, my bet is that with a Democrat House, they know it's not going to go anywhere, and so they didn't want to they didn't want to spend the political capital to make a statement. Honestly, I don't buy that, though, because I think that now is the perfect time to make a statement on this issue and say, look, we're going to stand up, we're going to be counted, and you've got to do something about this. Put the Democrats in the position where they're the ones blocking this opportunity to save money, to not spend ourselves further into debt, and to put ourselves in a better fiscal situation year after year.
Thank you for listening to the Luke Macias Show. If you value this content and want our message to spread, please consider 3 of the following steps. 1, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to us on and leave us a review. 2, visit LukeMacias.com and sign up for our email alerts. And 3, follow Raz and I on Twitter and visit my Facebook page at facebook.com/Luke Macias, Texas. Again, that's facebook.com/Luke Macias, Texas. Thank you so much, and God bless.